Hey guys, Dr. Hagmeyer here, and I've really got a great video lined up for you today. Last week I did a video on histamine intolerance and gut problems. I went through many of the different causes of histamine intolerance. I talked about some of the symptoms of histamine intolerance, and I've talked about a very important enzyme that is really one of the major culprits and major causes of histamine intolerance. And so today I'm talking about how you can improve that enzyme, specifically the DAO enzyme, right? Now, the other thing I want to talk to you about are really some of the vitamins that are needed to keep this DAO enzyme activity working, kind of humming along. And then lastly, what I want to do towards the end of this video, I want to share with you some practical tips on really what you can do to get started today with a low histamine diet. Now, if you remember, DAO is the enzyme that prevents the accumulation of histamine in the body, right? And if you're DAO deficient or you're deficient in one or more vitamins or one or more minerals that this enzyme requires, then of course you're going to develop the symptoms of excess histamine, right? So this becomes very, very important, especially when we refer back to that bucket analogy, right? So let's first start off with some of the practical tips and really just the reminders of, really when you want to get started, what to do when it comes to starting this low histamine diet. So number one is you want to avoid canned foods, right? You want to avoid eating, or at least reducing as much as possible, canned foods as well as carbonated beverages, even if it's carbonated water. And the reason for this is that many of these foods that you find, that are canned or so forth, they have preservatives, they have sulfites, they have nitrites, they have this benzoic acid that I just referred to. They contain yeast, and these are all known to be histamine liberators. So you really want to avoid these as much as possible, all right? Number two is you want to avoid fermented foods, right? So I know that there's so much benefit to fermented foods. However, when you have histamine intolerance, when you have bacterial overgrowth, when you have Crohn's, when you have ulcerative colitis, these fermented foods can be problematic, and we see this over and over and over again, right? So where do you find fermented foods? These are going to be cheeses. This is going to be beer. It's going to be wine. It's going to be relish. It's going to be pickles. It's going to be bone broth. It's going to be vinegar. And yes, if you're wondering if apple cider vinegar, is considered, yes, that can also be problematic. You also find, these fermented foods in anything that is yeast-based. So again, you have to start looking at your ingredients. Number three on the list is really histamine levels vary in foods, right? So depending on how they're prepared, how ripe they are, et cetera, they can vary, all right? Number four, try to purchase only fresh products, right? This is just a general rule, a general clean eating rule, but start eliminating packaged foods. The less packaged foods you eat, the better. And again, this becomes especially relevant when you have this histamine intolerance, okay? Number five is when you start a low histamine diet, try to make this the only change that you do, all right? Don't start a low histamine diet if you have an appointment with your doctor on Monday morning or next week and you think she may change your medications, right? You want to try to minimize as many variables as possible, right? Try to keep to the normal routine as much as possible. This way you'll know what works and what doesn't work. You'll know what's flaring you up and what's maybe not flaring you up. All right, number six, avoid reheating foods. And this is especially important when it comes to leftovers and it comes to reheating meat, right? When you reheat meat, you increase the concentration of histamines, sometimes by a factor of 10, right? This just defeats the whole purpose of really trying to reduce histamine in the first place. All right, number seven is it's easy to feel overwhelmed, right? And so very often you go on this histamine diet, there's obviously a lot of foods that you can't eat. You can feel overwhelmed at times. Instead, I want you to focus on all the foods that you can eat, right? This is one of those things that's really just a matter of perspective, right? Your glass is not half empty, your glass is half full. Again, I want you to focus on all the foods that you can eat. Again, feeling restricted is just counterproductive to success, right? Number eight, work with a functional medicine practitioner who can identify some of the other root causes behind your histamine intolerance, and one who will pair you up with a functional nutritionist. You see, tackling histamine intolerance requires really a team approach. It requires an understanding of what's filling up your bucket, what's filling up that bucket that we talked about in that last video. And number nine is don't beat yourself up if you relapse, right? Everyone has their own threshold and things that are filling up that histamine bucket. Your doctor will need to figure that out. he or she'll need to figure out what's filling up your bucket and really what is the best way on really just how to empty it, right? Diet is a starting point, but there's much more to histamine intolerance than just diet. Number 10, have fun with new foods, right? Let's face it, most people don't like change. We don't meet change, we do meet change with opposition, right? And here's what I'll say to that. After a few weeks of implementing a low histamine diet and making some lifestyle changes, what seemed so difficult at the very beginning just becomes a new habit, right? The first day of walking into a new gym is always the toughest, but after a few weeks, it feels like home. Why? Because it's now a new habit. And like anything in life that is going to contribute to success, we need to make that a habit, right? So make your health a habit. And number 11, stop procrastinating, right? I had a mentor once tell me, and it really just stuck with me, is that the learning is in the doing, right? So don't overthink that. To help you get started and make these changes, I put together a free low histamine guide. You can download it simply by going to my website. You can click on my conditions page at the very top, scroll down, and what you'll see is that condition called histamine intolerance, right? There, you'll be able to download that low histamine guide that I put together for you. All right. Now, the other thing that I want to mention is that if you have questions about working with me or working with one of my nutritionists, how to get started, you can click on the Start Here tab. We work with people from all over the world, and we can help you as much or as little as you like. All right. So the next thing I want to share with you real quickly is really how you can improve these DAO enzyme function, what kind of supplements you can take and things like that that will help. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to take a look at this illustration. And what you'll notice here is that at the very, very top, you have this histamine. Histamine is broken down into HNMT on the left, or I should say HNMT is the enzyme that breaks down histamine, and that's on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see DAO. All right, DAO again is that enzyme that breaks down histamine. Now in green letters, you're going to see SAMe on the left, and on the right-hand side in green, you're going to see iron, B6, B12, copper, and vitamin C. What this essentially means is that if you're deficient in any of these vitamin cofactors, the DAO enzyme or the HNMT enzyme is not going to work properly. In turn, histamine will not be broken down, and ultimately, you will experience all those symptoms of excess histamine. So things I want you to consider is if you are a woman, and let's say you have a heavy menstrual cycle, for whatever reason, maybe you have fibroids, maybe you have ovarian cysts, maybe you have endometriosis, there's a good chance that you are iron deficient, that you are deficient in B12, you are deficient in B6. If you have hemorrhoids, ulcers, H. pylori infections, you've been on proton pump inhibitors, you take Tylenol, you're on birth control pills for that matter, then your chances again are very, very high that you are going to be deficient in B12, in B6, and vitamin C. If you've been pounding down zinc, more than 30 to 60 milligrams a day, like many patients do when they have gut issues, leaky gut, you might also be low in copper, right? Zinc and copper have an inverse relationship. So what that means essentially is when one is high, the other one is low. So here is how pounding down zinc, too much of zinc for too long, can actually cause low copper levels, which then impede that enzyme from working properly. So if that's the case and you can relate to those, you need to start supplementing with those supplements that I just mentioned. Now, that's only one side of the equation. Let's go back to this illustration here, and what you'll notice here is the other enzyme on the left-hand side is, again, HNMT, and that, again, is an enzyme that also needs support. So this is the side of that pathway that's involved in methylation, and this is where SAMe and other sulfur-based donors can really help improve HNMT activity. Now, SAMe is interesting because SAMe can actually help boost serotonin levels, it can help boost dopamine levels, it can help with depression, it can help with anxiety, it can help with energy levels, it can help with focus, and really just a whole lot of other things that may be pertinent to you. All right. So now let's talk about some of the supplements that can help with DAO activity and in turn reduce these high histamine levels. Right. By the way, one thing I want to mention is that in my free guide, I also provide a list of foods that are high in histamine, foods that are low in histamine. I have a chart there that has a list of medications that can cause more histamine release as well. So if you're taking medications, those medications could be contributing to this histamine intolerance. Don't discontinue them, of course, without first discussing that with your doctor, but I do want you to be aware that many times medications that people take can actually contribute to other health problems. No, the other thing I want you to know here is that number one on my list from supplements that will help with histamine intolerance is quercetin, right? This is when you take quercetin, you're helping your body calm down inflammation, right? It blocks the release of histamine from mast cells. Quercetin has strong antioxidant activity. It helps support your immune system. It helps mediate various inflammatory chemicals like leukotrienes and prostaglandins. So again, it's very, very important in that whole inflammatory cascade as it relates to histamine. Number two on my list here of important supplements for histamine intolerance is DAO, right? Taking this enzyme directly. DAO is a patented enzyme, right? And so what that means is that DAO, which stands for diamine oxidase, is again that major enzyme that breaks down ingested histamine. So ultimately, this enzyme is going to take histamine, it's going to break it down, and again, taking this DAO enzyme becomes very, very important if you're following a low histamine diet, right? If you're not following a low histamine diet, this enzyme is not going to do a whole lot for you. So I always recommend that if you're starting a low histamine diet, that you support, again, those pathways with that supplement. Number three on my list of top supplements to help with histamine intolerance is stinging nettle leaf, right? And stinging nettle extracts. These are essentially what it does. Stinging nettle has been shown to balance the immune system. Stinging nettle helps with the mucosal surfaces. So that means your urinary tract, your respiratory tract, your nasal passages, and your gut lining. So any place where there's a mucosal surface, stinging nettle can be very, very helpful in preventing and adhering the binding of those histamine receptors. Number four on my list is bromelain, right? Bromelain comes from pineapples. It's considered a proteolytic plant enzyme. And bromelain is important for two reasons. Number one, like I said, proteolytic means that it's protein digesting, so it breaks down proteins. And this becomes very important because we know that large proteins are very stimulating to the immune system, right? So that becomes a problem in itself. If the immune system can't recognize large proteins, then that is going to set off a cascade of inflammatory mediators within the body. Now, the nice thing about bromelain is that, of course, it breaks down those large proteins into smaller ones. And so I kind of always think about bromelain and other proteolytic enzymes as like a pair of scissors, right? They basically cut large proteins into smaller ones. Again, this allows the immune system to do its job better. And then the second reason bromelain is very important is that it's been shown to enhance the absorption of quercetin. Number five on my list is good old essential omega-3 fatty acids, right? Omega-3 essential fatty acids have been shown to have a stabilizing effect on cell membranes. They've been shown to increase DAO activity, which again helps us break down histamine. Okay, so there you go. Those are some great tips to get started if you're new to histamine intolerance or even if you needed a little bit of a refresher. All right, so there you go. Hope you liked today's video. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Be sure to do so. Also, make sure you turn on your notifications. This is super important because I plan on doing a couple Q&A sessions every month on YouTube. If you're not familiar with YouTube Live, this is where you'll be able to log into our YouTube channel. You'll be able to ask me questions on topics that we talk about. And also, these live sessions, if you turn on the notifications, you'll be notified when we go live, right? So that can be very important if you want to get some of those questions answered. So glad you tuned in today. Hope you learned a few things, and we'll see you soon. Take care.